Hi everyone, welcome back to the AI language. So today we are going to use the while loop in our OpenAI Agent Builder workflow. Just to give you a quick glance on what we're going to build in this lecture, this is what it's going to look like. We're going to start with the start node that's going to start our workflow as always. Then we'll have a set state node. So that's going to set up the state before the while loop starts, like the counter and the output tracking, so that we can understand how many iterations have happened and what is the latest output from each iteration. Then we are going to have a while loop, and this is going to run our agent and then update the state after each iteration as the agent runs. Once the while loop is done with all its iterations, the workflow is going to end with the end node. And this is going to demonstrate how we can use a while loop to iterate on a particular task that might involve some agents. So let's start from scratch and build this workflow. So before we start, let's look at what a while loop is and what are the different elements of a while loop that we need to be aware of before we can build this. For this, I'm going to head to the Wikipedia page for the while loop over here. Let's scroll down to a code snippet over here and let's look at this to understand the various elements. So the first element that we're going to focus on in this code is the counter, and this is an integer and it's initialized with a value of 0. This is going to keep a track of how many times the while loop has run and when is it time to exit the while loop based on some exit condition. All right. We're going to call this counter, and in this example, this counter is represented by X. And you can clearly see that this is initialized to a starting value of 0 before the while loop starts or before the while loop comes in. And that's what we're going to do in our example as well, that we're going to set a counter equal to 0 before introducing the while loop. All right, so now let's look at the while loop itself. So you can see the while loop starts over here and ends over here, and it checks some condition over here. So this is an exit condition or a test condition, which determines whether the while loop should continue iterating on the work that it is doing over here. Over here, the condition is that your value of X, the counter, is supposed to be less than 5. So when we start with a value of 0, this particular condition is going to evaluate to true, and all this work is going to be done once. At the end, we'll increment the value of the counter to denote the fact that one iteration is now complete, and it'll go back again with the value of X now equal to 1. Again, 1 is less than 5, this condition is true, and again the same work is going to be done. Over here, the work is a simple printf statement, so it's going to print this line and again with an updated value of the counter X. Now eventually, when X increments and becomes equal to 5, this condition will evaluate to false and the while loop will not iterate further, because 5 is not less than 5, 5 is actually equal to 5. So this condition is going to evaluate to false, and we'll exit the while loop and not do any further work included over here. So it's actually not going to print any more lines with the X value over here. That is essentially what the while loop is. There's a counter, there's an update to the counter every time one iteration is done, and there is some work that you do over here. While you do that work, in each iteration, you check for this test condition over here. And if this condition evaluates to false, you stop iterating on the work that you're doing. All right. So that's how the while loop works. And that's what we are going to now implement in this no code builder over here. So to do this, we need to first include a counter variable. So we're going to take the set state node over here and connect it to the start node. We can select the set state node over here and we can say that, assign a value 0 to a variable. And let's add a new variable over here and let's call that counter. It's going to be of type number, and let's name this as counter, and we can provide it a default value of let's say 1. So we'll start a counter with 1 so that we know which iteration we are on. based on the counter value at the beginning of the while loop. All right. So to begin with, we'll be on iteration number 1, and that will be the value before the while loop has iterated. So let's click on save over here, and now we are assigning the value equal to 1 over here as the starting value. You can simply click outside, and this is going to update the set state over here. We also need to add another state variable over here, which is going to track the output generated by each iteration of the while loop. So every time the while loop runs, we have an HTML page that is generated, and the next iteration simply uses that HTML page that was generated in the previous iteration and improves upon it. All right. So we need to save the output produced by one iteration of the while loop in a variable so that it can be reused by the next iteration. And that is the variable we are going to add over here. So let's add a value over here and let's call it NA. So that's the starting value for the HTML page, because we don't have a HTML page generated before the while loop starts. And let's add a new variable for this. So let's let it be a string over here, and let's call it. So we're going to call it current underscore output. So it just means what is the output of the current iteration. The default value is NA, and the beginning value that we assign to it is also NA. And we're going to click save over here, and then let's just click outside, and this is going to set the state with these two variables. Now we're ready to introduce the while loop. So let's drag out this node and put it over here, and let's align it with the other nodes. Now the while loop is a bit different. As you can see, you have a dashed boundary over here, and you have space inside the while loop. So the inside of the while loop is what is going to be iterated upon. So you can add nodes over here, and it simply means that the while loop is going to run those nodes again and again. And just like we saw on the page on Wikipedia, we have an expression over here which is going to be checked. And once this expression becomes false, it's going to exit the while loop. So let's start by adding the expression over here. So once you click over here, you get options over here. So I'm going to select counter because that is the variable that I want to check. Now there are a set of comparisons over here which I can use to check the counter value and decide whether I want to exit the while loop or not. So this is going to loop while a condition is true. Now we want to run the while loop, let's say 2 times to begin with. So I can choose the less than equal to sign over here, and I can put 2 over here. Now what this means is that the counter starts with a value 1, and that's going to evaluate to true when it's compared with 2, because 1 is less than equal to 2. And then it's going to increment the counter by 1. So the next time that it runs, the counter is going to be 2, and when you compare 2 with 2, you'll get this condition to evaluate to true. So 2 is equal to 2, so this is going to be true. So it's going to run a second time, and then again we're going to increment the counter now to 3. And that is when this condition is going to evaluate to false, and the while loop is going to stop looping and it's going to exit. So this essentially means that I'm going to run the while loop 2 times. Alright, so that completes my while loop condition over here. And now I can add all the work that I want to be done those many number of times inside the while loop. Alright. So first I'm going to add an agent because I want to generate a web page. So that's what I'm going to add. And once I do that, you see that the agent comes inside the while loop and it's connected to both ends over here. Now the agent is essentially going to generate the web page for me. And once it generates one version of the web page, I want to increment the counter by 1 so that I can tell the while loop that one iteration has now been completed. So I need to add a setState node over here that increments that counter by 1. So let's select the while loop over here. Let's expand it to make some space inside it. And let's add the setState node over here. Now I can actually connect the setState node to the exit node over here. And I can remove the agent's edge that travels from the agent to the exit over here. And let's press the backspace or delete key and delete this edge. And now let's connect the agent to the set state. What we're essentially saying is that the while loop is going to run the agent once, and then it's going to set the counter variable by incrementing it by 1. And now the counter is going to be 2. Then it's again going to check its condition, and this time 2 is less than equal to 2 will evaluate to true. So it's going to run the agent a second time. Then again it's going to set the counter to an incremented value of 3. And now the condition in the while loop is going to evaluate to false. So it's not going to run the agent a third time and then exit from here. Alright, so this is my while loop. Let me just arrange this a bit over here like so. And let's connect our input over here. And then let's actually connect an end node at the end over here. Alright, so this is going to complete our entire flow. And now we just need to set up this particular agent and set state node. Let's select the agent and let's call this HTML page generator. And let's provide some instructions over here. So I'm going to expand this prompt and I'm going to write the instructions over here. Alright, so I'm going to first give some basic instructions over here. So you are an HTML page generator. Generate an HTML page as per the user query as a single unified HTML, CSS and JS document. Alright, so that's the base set of instructions, and we'll tell the agent about the fact that it can iterate on the document. So we'll say that you're given an iteration number below. If it is the first iteration, generate the first version of the page. And if the current iteration number is more than 1, use the current output and the initial user query to generate an even improved version of this HTML page. And the max iterations are 2. So now the agent knows that it's iterating on the web page. It's beginning with the first iteration where it needs to generate the first version. And in the next set of iterations, it needs to improve on that previous version. All right. We can add that the current iteration number is, and this is going to tell the agent what that iteration number is. So I'm going to add 2 curly braces over here and then select this counter state variable over here. And if you remember, the counter state variable was 1 to begin with. So it knows this is the first iteration. The next thing I'm going to tell the agent is that the initial user query, which was given by the user, was, and then let's again add 2 curly braces, and we're going to select the workflow input over here from here. So you can go and click on this, or you can press the tab key. So that's going to add the workflow input as text, so workflow dot input as text as the initial user query. And this is going to be the query that we enter in the chat box and we give to the agent to work on. We've already provided max iterations are 2. So we can actually cut this and put it over here. And as an improvement to this workflow, you can actually set this as a state variable as well, so that you don't have to manually specify it over here. And then your agent is more generic in nature and you can change this very easily. But for now, we're just going to keep it as a number written over here that max iterations are 2. This is the same variable that we are checking as a condition inside the while loop as well. And now let's tell the agent what the current output is. So I'll say the current output for the web page that you generated is, and I'll put double curly braces over here, and I'll select current output over here. All right. So now the agent knows that it's working with this particular current output. It needs to iterate on it twice. To begin with, this is going to be NA. And then it'll know that this is the query it has to work against. So this is what it has to generate the web page for. And then it knows that this is the current iteration number. So we can click on save over here. All right, so this sets up the instructions for the agent. And now we just quickly look through the other options over here. And everything seems fine except the output format. So we want our agent to generate a JSON output. It's just like that. This is just like what we did in our previous lectures, and we'll just click on add schema over here. We'll keep the name as response schema. Then we're going to click on add property and let's call this property HTML doc, and let's add a description over here. So I'm going to say it's a unified HTML, CSS, JS doc, which is holding the entire web page as a single file. and let's click on update. Alright, so that's your response schema, and now we can just simply click outside to save this. Now we need to work with the setState variable. So we need to do two things over here. The first thing is we need to increment the counter, and the second thing is that we want to take the output from the HTML page generator and assign it to the current output. So let's do those two things. So first let's update the counter. So in the variable option over here, I'm going to select counter and I'm going to assign it a value, which is the current value for the counter and then +1. So this is going to essentially increment the counter by 1 whenever the HTML page generator runs through one iteration, or the while loop runs through one iteration. All right. And this is the equivalent of doing x ++ at the end over here in this while loop. So we had x equal to the counter and we incremented the counter by 1 over here. The other thing that I want to do is I want to assign the value to the current output, which represents the latest output from the HTML page generator. So I'm going to select the current output in the to variable over here, and you can click over here and then simply select one of the options over here. So I can see that the HTML page generator entire output text is available over here. So I can just simply click this. And once you do that, you get the value input.output_text, and that's going to be assigned to the current output. All right. And now I can just click outside over here. So now whenever one iteration runs, the counter updates by 1 and the output from the HTML page generator is going to be assigned to the current output. And then this flow is going to end. So essentially this completes the entire flow. So let's align it a little better, and now we have this entire flow in front of us. Now let's preview this by clicking on the preview button over here. So I've clicked on preview and I'm going to provide a query over here. So the query is going to be generate a landing page template for an online course teaching about AI and agents. All right. And let's press enter to send this query in. And now let's see that how our workflow proceeds. So we have the start and the setState node that have been completed. These are the initial ones. And then we have the HTML web page generator that's now working on designing the course landing page. And you can see this is happening as part of the while loop, which is also working at the same time. So this is iteration 1 that's happening. And let's wait for this iteration to complete. And hopefully we'll see the setState node get activated briefly, and then again this will return back to the HTML page generator to run iteration number 2. So now you can see that the setState has been completed and it's headed back to the HTML page generator to generate a second iteration of the web page that it's working on right now. Alright, so now it's completed and you can see that we have the setState and the end node all colored, and it shows that this flow is now complete. And now we can copy the output over here. So you'll see that all this output is formatted as text and not as JSON. So it's very difficult to copy and pass this out in VS Code. Instead, you can click on this link over here, and this is going to take you to the logs for this particular response. So once this opens, you can actually head down to the bottom, and you can also see how the query was structured, that the current iteration number is 2 and max iterations are 2. So this is the second iteration output that we have. And if you head down to the bottom, you can actually see the output formatted as JSON. So let's copy this JSON formatted output and let's start from the place where the HTML doc starts, and let's copy this entire thing. Now this is my HTML document, and now I can head to Visual Studio Code. In Visual Studio Code, you can see that I've created a while loop example folder, which is numbered 3 over here. This has a prompts folder with our agent prompt that we have used, and we have an outputs folder as well. So I'm going to add a file over here, and I'm going to call this iteration2.html, and let's press enter. And now we're going to paste the HTML that we have generated over here. And you can see that it comes in entirely in a single line. So you can just right click and click on format document. So this is going to format the HTML. Apart from this, we also do one regular cleaning exercise, which is called unescaping this document. So I'm going to select everything and press Command Alt and semicolon. So this is going to unescape all the special escape characters that have been used. And now I have iteration2.html ready for previewing. Let me save this file, and now let's just go back to the agent builder and copy the iteration1 output so that we can compare how it has improved the output from iteration1 to iteration2. Alright, so I'm back over here. Let me click on the logs button over here and let me go to the previous log. Alright, so this was the last log that I have, and this is the one before this. So let's go to this, and I can see that now over here I have all this written over here with the current iteration number specified as 1. So this is the first iteration, and I have the reasoning over here, designing the course landing page, and here is my JSON output. So let's just copy this HTML like we did last time. Let's head back to VS Code now. I'm back in VS Code, and let me just create another file over here and call this iteration1.html. Let me paste the HTML output over here, and again let's format this document, and then let's also select the entire document and unescape it by pressing Command Alt and semicolon. Right, so I have iteration1.html also formatted well over here, and now these two are both green, so this means there are no errors, and I can preview them inside my web browser. So for that I'm going to head back to Chrome, but before that let's just copy the path for one of these files. So I'm going to click on right click on this and select copy path. Alright, so here is our output. So we have iteration1.html over here, and we have iteration2.html over here. And right off the bat you can actually see that there are some changes that it has made. So first of all, the entire page looks pretty good, well structured, and there's a hero section over here, there's a title section, and so on. There's also a theme button, so you can actually change the theme from dark to light, and that's pretty impressive. And now this is the first output, and if we quickly shift to the other tab, we can see that this is the aspect that changes if we keep on shifting. And there is some positioning that is updated over here. So there are minor changes that the agent has made from iteration1 to iteration2. Somehow it thought that this symbol is a better one for the theme symbol, and once you actually click on this, it changes to a sun symbol over here, while in this one the symbol remains the same. The other change that I saw that this had made was that if you scroll down, it just keeps on scrolling down to different sections. But in this page, if you scroll down, it actually auto selects what section you're on. So it goes to features first, and if you go down further, it goes to gallery, and then it goes to pricing. So those are some other minor changes that it did. But apart from that, it has actually not done a lot of other improvements. What we can definitely see is that it did take in the first output, made the changes it expected to make, and then updated your page according to those. Ideally, you would specify more details around what kind of changes it could look at, but this was just an example to show that you can have a while loop which can iterate on a certain task that can involve certain nodes, and then those nodes are run again and again based on some test condition, like for example the counter that we had. We did 2 iterations over here on a web page, and we have web page number 1 and then an improved version of this web page, which is web page number 2 over here. So that's all for this particular lecture. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next lecture.